Hi there, it's Llarold, and this is the BFA Protection Warrior preview. Prot Warriors have undergone the most changes of any tank class on the beta, so let's just dive right in. First things first, how does it play? For the first time, I can honestly say, not that much like live. Rage generation has been redesigned and rebalanced, and it's down quite a bit. Ignore Pain is gone, and Warriors don't have any defensive use for Rage beyond maintaining shield block. If you like Warriors offense, which I do, you'll be happy to hear that not much has changed there. Alright, let's get to what's changed in the base class. First off, Warriors now get 40% of their strength added to their armor value. This is a passive, always-on buff, and it's pretty fantastic. Demoralizing Shout's cooldown has been cut in half, down to 45 seconds, but it's now on the global cooldown, which I have a real problem with. Shield Block's rage cost has been more than doubled, up to 40 rage, and its cooldown has been increased by 5 seconds, up to 18 seconds per recharge. Shield Slam now generates 15 rage, down from 20, and on that note, passive rage generation has been changed as well. You no longer generate rage from damage taken, instead you now generate 2 rage with every auto attack and 3 with every auto attack that hits you. Blocking auto attacks still generates rage on the beta at this point, but dodging and parrying attacks does not. Finally, Intercept is on a little half-second global cooldown now, which basically just means you can't charge at the same time as you cast something else. Next up, what's being lost from Legion? As I already mentioned, Ignore Pain is gone, which means that any and all rage above the amount needed to aggressively use shield block is completely useless from a defensive perspective. This isn't good class design. Now, I don't want to simply come across as negative, and I definitely don't think that losing Ignore Pain makes the class unplayable or even bad. Ignore Pain spent pretty much all of Legion either being overtuned or undertuned, and it really doesn't make that much sense for Warriors, just from a class fantasy standpoint, to be generating hundreds of millions of damage and shields every fight. Removing Ignore Pain could certainly be the right move, but Warriors do need a defensive use for their rage beyond shield block. There are several good ways Blizzard could make this work. Simply removing the cooldown from shield block and making it more like Druid's Iron Fur could be really effective. Maybe too effective. They could also tack a defensive value or some kind of healing onto casting Revenge, or put more work into the new talent Bolster, which I'll get to once I cover the talent section. It is important to remember that this is still the beta, and if the class feels unfinished right now, it's because it is. Battlecry is also being removed. It's being replaced with a better cooldown, really, and there's not much more to say. Crit doesn't do anything except increase your damage, and aside from tier 21, Battlecry was a DPS cooldown only. From the artifact weapon, there are really only 2 interesting traits that Prot Warriors will miss. The first, and frankly less important of the 2, is the artifact ability itself, Neltharion's Fury. Under most normal circumstances, it was a fairly useless skill, but for reducing damage from blockable boss abilities such as Argus's Scythe, it was one of the most powerful defensive cooldowns in the entire game. And now it's gone. Oh well. Reflective plating will also be removed, and most Warriors are going through the stages of grief on this one. I'm still stuck at bargaining. Blizzard, please don't make me go back to spell reflection breaking on the very first spell that hits it. Please. Moving on to legendaries, Protection Warriors really didn't have any that affect the rotation in a big way. Sure, Kekoshan's Storm Scale Gauntlets are a huge rage and DPS increase, and Thunder God's Vigor let you demo shout way more often, but they didn't really change how you use your rotational skills in an important way. Tons of Warriors are going to miss the steady stream of healing provided by Manaroth's Bloodletting Manacles as well, but with the changes and reductions to rage generation in BFA, they really would lose a lot of strength anyways. Let's move on to what's been added. This isn't really a huge list, but there are some pretty cool additions. Battle Shout is back for Warriors of all specs. It provides a 10% bonus to attack power for everyone in your raid. Neato! All Warrior specs now also have access to Rallying Cry, which is nice. Avatar is now a baseline offensive cooldown for Protection Warrior, and it generates 20 rage per cast. It's on the global cooldown, but what you gonna do? Shockwave is now a baseline skill for Protection Warrior, and Intimidating Shout has been added back to Protection Warriors as well. Now that the base class stuff is covered, let's take a look at talents. The talent tree for Protection Warriors has gotten some serious work done since Legion. Like if Vengeance Demon Hunters and Blood DK's got a facelift, then Protection Warriors have gotten like 4 new arms grafted onto their body. Let's quickly point out what's gone. Shockwave and Avatar were both made baselines, so they're obviously out. Warbringer is gone as well. Inspiring Presence was an insane amount of raid utility for one class to have, and so it's gone. And since Ignore Pain's going away to a farm-up state with all the other abilities we don't see anymore, Renewed Fury is going to have to go keep it company. Finally, Warlord's Challenge is gone, but no one cares. Now let's go through the new talent tree and break it down. The first tier of talents starts with a revamped Into the Fray. This talent now scales with enemies and allies, meaning it's going to be worth 15% haste in most group situations. That's a pretty nice buff, and it will probably be a good talent for AoE tanking. Punish is an amazing new talent for single target tanking and DPS. And Impending Victory is still horrendous. A 15% heal on a 30-second cooldown is laughably ineffective, especially when you have to give up either of two really good offensive and defensive talents right next to it. The talent is worth a free 30% heal if you manage to score a killing blow, but guess what? That's just baseline Victory Rush, man! In the next tier, Crackling Thunder is still a nice AoE pickup radius increase, fighting with Bounding Stride's great mobility increase. They're both good talents. Safeguard is unchanged from Legion, but the loss of Ignore Pain, or any way to reduce the damage Safeguard transfers without using a defensive cooldown, makes it pretty dangerous to the Protection Warrior using it. Overall, it's not looking good for Safeguard, more like Dangerous Guard. Best Served Cold is unchanged from Legion, but with nothing to spend Rage on except for shield block every 15 seconds or so, it's been indirectly buffed by a bunch. Unstoppable Force is a decent increase to AoE DPS while Avatar's active, but it doesn't really look that competitive at this point. No idea what the third talent is yet, the class is still under construction. In the next tier, Indomitable has been cut down to a 10% health crease, which still makes it the best choice for dealing with big spikes of burst damage, but not the clear-cut best option all of the time. Good change. Never Surrender is a passive increase to block chance that has a couple of problems with it. The first issue is just that not all damage is blockable. In fact, some of the most dangerous damage in the game is unblockable, and it's worthless for that. If a source of dangerous damage, such as an Argus Scythe, is blockable, you're probably going to want to have shield block up to guarantee you block it. Never Surrender isn't going to help you with that situation either. The final problem is that while it's a good source of passive damage reduction when you're at low health, tanks don't typically hover around low health unless something is really wrong. As a result, the chances that you're ever going to make the most of this talent are super low. Too bad. At the end of the tier we have Bolster, which seems like it could be a great talent that could fix Prot Warrior's lack of a defensive use for Rage beyond casting Shield Block, and it does. Kinda not. Unfortunately, all it really does is provide a maintenance buff, and it is on the global cooldown. This means you have to spend one global every 10 seconds not dealing damage to maintain it. Every global a Protection Warrior spends should be pointed toward trying to reset Shield Slam and generate more Rage. This talent gets in the way of that. Because of armor's diminishing returns, adding another 40% of your strength onto your armor isn't remotely close to the huge boost you got from the baseline trait. This talent's worth about 6.5% more damage reduction, from physical sources only. Compare that to a 10% health boost that works on spell damage and doesn't waste globals or rage you could at least spend on revenge, and it's a disappointing talent, at least for now. There are some ways to fix it, number 1 being take it off the GCD, and numbers 2 through infinity being reduce the cost and duration and make it stackable like Druid's Iron Fur, or a bunch of other better ideas than that. The next tier of talents is good. It's basically just 3 choices between buffs to your crowd control abilities. I like Stormbolt because it gives me a ranged CC tool, but that does mean it's another keybind. Rumbling Earth will let you cast Shockwave a little more often in AoE, and Menace turns Intimidating Shout into a legitimate AoE CC that won't pull tons of extra mobs. Moving down to the next to last tier, Booming Voice has had its rage generation reduced to 40 per cast to compensate for Demo Shout's reduced cooldown, and its damage increase has been nerfed to only 15% as well. It's not really that great of a talent without all of the synergies from Legion, but the 40 rage does allow you to Demo Shout and immediately cast Shield Block, which isn't bad. And it's still a decent offensive cooldown as well. Vengeance has been redesigned to work with Shield Block instead of Ignore Pain, and the tuning is actually good enough that this is the best rage talent in the tier by a huge margin. Unfortunately, because generating rage just means more revenge casts and nothing else, this is the worst defensive talent. And it's not like it's really that good for offense either. You give up Devastator or Booming Voice to get a little less than 3 extra revenges per minute. Whoop-de-doo. Finally, Devastator is about the same as it is in Legion, except it no longer generates rage and only has a 20% chance to reset Shield Slam down from 30%. This is maybe still the best DPS option in the tier, and definitely the simplest to play with. Spamming Devastate's still pretty boring, and I like Devastator at least in principle, but it's lost a lot of strength compared to Legion. Finally, the last tier is all the exact same as it is in Legion. That's a shame because Ravager's been dead for years and deserves a proper burial. With the reductions to rage generation and the loss of Ignore Pain, anger management has been hit with a pretty big indirect nerf. This probably means that Heavy Repercussions is going to be the best talent, but I guess we'll see. Here is a talent setup I would probably run for raiding. And here is my potential Mythic Dungeon setup. Before I finish up, and this part of the video is extra super duper special, subject to change, I want to go over Azerite traits. Prot Warriors only have 3 Azerite traits to look at so far, but I really like them all. The first up is Deafening Crash, which causes Thunderclap to deal extra damage and shield you when it only hits one target. This is a very solid increase to single target DPS and a self-shield for a class with an extremely limited defensive toolkit. The one drawback is that it's useless in AoE. Next up is Sword and Board, which grants you a strength buff whenever Devastate or Devastator resets the cooldown of Shield Slam. This is a totally passive buff, but it has a nice defensive component via the passive strength to armor conversion. Again, a very solid trait. Last up is Reinforced Plating, which grants you a stacking strength buff every time you block an attack. When tanking an AoE, this will basically be fully stacked at all times. Of the 3 traits, all of which are very solid, this one is by far the most solid. So now for the 2 most important questions: is Protection Warrior still fun, and is it good? I started out the video by saying that Protection Warrior really doesn't feel the same as it does on live, and that's true. I think the thing that's surprising is how much still does feel the same, despite all of the massive amount of changes the class has undergone. Even with the loss of legendaries in Tier 21, the offense feels about as fun and visceral as it ever has. The stripped down, incomplete defensive toolkit is the real problem, and while Warrior has been more effective in dungeons than I expected, primarily due to its new CC tools, it's definitely at the bottom of the barrel of tanks in terms of defense. This is a criticism I've heard overused when talking about tank design and redesigns in the past, but it truly feels like a DPS spec that's just wearing a shield. Overall, I would say that Prot Warrior is still fun, but it's not good right now. Fortunately, the class isn't done, and it only needs a few key changes to be good, and just as rewarding to play defensively as it is offensively. I have faith in Blizzard to get Prot Warriors back on track, and I will definitely be there providing feedback for the rest of the beta in hopes that they get it right. Well, I think that about covers it. If you have any questions about Prot Warrior, ask away. I will be previewing the rest of the tank classes in the days and weeks to come, so stay tuned for more great BFA Beta content, and as always, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Bye.